The rain had stopped an hour before the carriage reached the gates of Wickham House, but Clara Hartley could still feel it inside her gloves, a damp little weight at the seam of each finger. The footman handed her down without meeting her eyes. The gravel crunched under her plain travelling boots. Somewhere above the long grey facade, a window stood open, and the curtains moved as if a hand had only just let them fall. "Step lively, Miss Hartley," said Mrs. Penn, the housekeeper, already 3 paces ahead. "Her Grace does not care to be kept." "I am not late," Clara answered, because she was not. "You are not early either." Mrs. Penn glanced back. Her mouth had the practiced softness of a woman who had spent 30 years making cruel, small things sound reasonable. "And in this house, child, that is the same as late." Clara took the steps 2 at a time to keep up. The vestibule swallowed her. Black-and-white marble, a clock the size of a doorway, the cold smell of lemon polish and old fires. A footman in plum livery took her cloak and made it disappear before she could thank him. She had practiced the curtsy for 3 days at the parsonage. She had practiced it again in the carriage, knees pressed together, head tilting at what her aunt called the proper modest fraction. None of that practice prepared her for the silence of the great drawing-room when the doors swung open. The Duchess of Wickham sat in the centre of a half-circle of pale gold chairs. There were 8 other women in the room, and 1 elderly cousin propped near the fire, and not one of them was speaking. The Duchess held a cup of tea in her left hand, as if it were a small bird she had decided not to crush yet. She was beautiful in the cold, careful way of women who had been beautiful so long it had become a tool. Her hair was the colour of new pewter. Her eyes did not blink as Clara entered. "This is the Hartley girl," she said to Mrs. Penn, not to Clara. The housekeeper, beside the door, inclined her head with the long-trained smoothness of a servant. "It is, Your Grace." The fire in the grate cracked once, sharp and small. "Bring her closer." Clara walked the long carpet without hurry. She had decided, somewhere between the 2nd mile and the 4th, that she would not let this house see her hurry. She stopped at the polite distance her aunt had drilled into her, 3 paces from her Grace's slippered foot, and dropped into a curtsy that the village rector himself had said was perfect. The Duchess watched it land. Then she set down her teacup, very gently, on the little inlaid table beside her, and said, in the same tone she might have used to ask for more sugar, "Lower." The word, in the long stillness of the drawing-room, fell like a small, bright pin onto a marble floor. Clara held the curtsy as long as her thighs would allow, and then, because she had been raised by a careful father, she dipped another half-inch, eyes on the carpet's woven roses. A second word, the same small, bright weight. "Lower," the Duchess said again. A small intake of breath went round the half-circle of women, half pity, half something less kind. Clara's knees had begun to tremble. She lowered herself another inch. The skirt of her plain grey gown pooled on the carpet around her like spilled water. "Curtsy lower, child," the Duchess said. Not loud, quiet and very clear, the way a thin sliver of ice is quiet. "If you mean to enter this house under my son's protection, you will learn how deep a girl of your station bends to a girl of mine." Clara felt the carpet under her right knee. She had not meant to put it there. The tremor in her legs had betrayed her at the last half-inch, and she was kneeling now in front of the Duchess of Wickham, with one knee on the floor and her head bowed so low that the loose curl at her temple brushed the silk of the older woman's hem. The room was perfectly silent. Even the fire seemed to have held its breath. And then, from the far door, a man's voice, dry, quite calm, and pitched to carry to the chandeliers. "That is quite enough, Mother." Clara did not look up. She could not. Her face had begun to burn in a way that had nothing to do with the fire. Footsteps crossed the carpet, unhurried, a riding boot speaking once against each bare board before it met the rug. A gloved hand closed under her elbow. Another, ungloved, slid beneath her other arm. The grip was firm and impersonal, and absolutely certain. The grip of a man who had been pulling foals out of mud and tenants out of debt since he was 12. His breath, near her ear, smelled of cold rain and tea, and the faint sharp wool of his coat. "On your feet, Miss Hartley," the Duke of Wickham said, very near her ear. "We do not kneel in this room." He lifted her, not roughly, with the same quiet competence one used to right a tipped chair. Clara found herself on her feet before her thighs had quite agreed to hold her, and the Duke's hand stayed at her elbow long enough to steady her, and then withdrew. He turned to face the half-circle of women, and Clara, blinking the wet out of her eyes, saw him properly for the first time. He was not what she had pictured. She had pictured someone older, heavier, given to red waistcoats and gout. This man was perhaps 28, lean as a fencer, dark hair still damp at the temples. His coat was plain dark wool. The collar of his shirt was open one button at the throat, as if he had ridden hard and walked straight through the house. His eyes, when they moved over the assembled women, were the colour of strong tea and very, very awake. "Mother," he said, with no warmth. "Miss Hartley is a guest in this house, not a footman applying for a place. You will not ask her to kneel again." The teacup in the older woman's hand did not tremble. A small drop of tea slid down the outside of the porcelain and beaded on her thumb. "I asked her to curtsy," she said. "You asked her until she fell," he answered. "She did not fall." "She knelt, Mother, in front of you, in front of these ladies." He let the silence do half the work, the way certain men do. Somewhere in the half-circle of chairs, a lace handkerchief brushed silk. "I would prefer that not happen twice in one afternoon." The Duchess picked up her teacup. Her hand was perfectly steady. "Adrian," she said, and the name was a small private barb. "You will embarrass me before my guests." "I rather think you have managed that yourself." A sound that was not quite a laugh went round the half-circle, smothered fast in lace handkerchiefs. The Duchess's chin lifted half an inch. She did not look at Clara at all. She looked only at her son, and what passed between them was older than Clara, and colder, and not for sharing. The Duchess's fingers tightened, very slightly, on the gilt arm of her chair. The room held its breath. "Sit down, Miss Hartley," the Duke said, without turning his head. "There is a chair behind you. Mrs. Penn will bring you tea. You have had a long ride." Clara sat. The chair was behind her exactly where he had said it would be, and she sat because her legs had decided, on their own, that they were finished with standing. Mrs. Penn moved across the room with a small porcelain cup. The Duke did not sit. He stood at the corner of the carpet, with his hands clasped at the small of his back, like a man on a parade ground, waiting for the band to be done. "We will continue this conversation, Mother," he said, "in the green room, in 1/4 of an hour. The rest of you ladies, I'm sure my mother will be delighted to ring for fresh tea." 8 women rose almost at once, the way starlings lift from a hedge. They curtsied to the Duchess, and, more carefully, to the Duke. None quite looked at Clara, except one, a small, sharp-faced young woman in primrose silk, who, on her way past Clara's chair, dropped one half-syllable of a smile and was gone. The doors closed. The fire spoke once into the silence. The Duke turned very deliberately and bowed to Clara, a real bow, the kind a man gives to a lady he has wronged. "Miss Hartley," he said, "I am Adrian Marchmont, Duke of Wickham. I owe you an apology before you have been in this house 10 minutes, and I have not yet earned the right to make it. So I will only say, welcome to Wickham, and I am sorry for the manner of your arrival. There will be a fire in your room and a hot supper on a tray, and no further interviews tonight." Clara found, to her own surprise, that her voice was steady. "Thank you, Your Grace." "Adrian will do, between us, once you are dry." She nodded, which was all her tongue would allow, and the Duke went away to the green room to do whatever a Duke did to a Duchess who had asked a girl to kneel. Mrs. Penn led Clara up 2 staircases and along a corridor that smelled of old beeswax and rain. The room she opened was small, but warm, and the curtains had been drawn and a fire built and a bath ordered. A maid called Susan, perhaps 16, with freckles and very tidy hands, helped Clara out of the damp travelling dress. The water in the bath was almost too hot. Clara sat in it until her knees stopped shaking and the burning under her cheekbones cooled to a low, manageable shame. She had been brought to Wickham House because her father, the Reverend James Hartley of Little Compton, had once, 26 years ago, saved the life of the present Duke's father in a hunting accident on the moor. The old Duke had never forgotten it. The old Duke had, in his will, left a sum sufficient to dower the Reverend's only daughter, on the condition that she be presented at Wickham and judged suitable to receive it. The condition had not been an act of cruelty. It had been an act of love by a failing man who could not quite imagine that his widow would turn the visit into an inspection of livestock. Clara understood all of this. Her aunt had explained it, gently, over breakfast and dinner, and breakfast again, for 3 days. She had not understood, until this afternoon, that the dowry was the smaller part of what was on offer. The larger part, it now appeared, was a husband. Specifically, the Duke. Specifically, the lean, dark-eyed man who had pulled her off the carpet. Clara closed her eyes against the bath water and laughed, once, without sound. She had been kneeling at his mother's feet for less than a minute, and already she could feel the shape of the trap closing around her. Stay and be measured. Leave and forfeit the dowry her father had been promised. And either way, learn very quickly how the women of this house intended to teach a parson's daughter her place. She was tired. She was also, she realized, no longer afraid. Downstairs in the green room, the door clicked shut behind the Duke, and the Duchess took a slow seat by the fire. "You insulted me," she said. The green room fire was newer than the drawing room fire, and brighter. The light off it flickered on the silk wallpaper in a fast, restless pattern. "I corrected you," he answered. "Before the Carstairs and the Ledbury girls and Lady Frances Vane, before whom exactly is not the point." "Adrian." "Mother." He did not sit. He stood at the mantel and rested one hand on the cold marble. The stone was smooth under his palm, and very old. "You will not ask that girl to kneel again." "She is the daughter of a country parson." He did not turn. He spoke to the fire. "She is the daughter of the man who saved my father's life. She is also, as I understand it, the residual legatee of an estate my father intended she should inherit in full if your conduct in this matter proved less than honourable." The Duchess's eyes flickered, once, fast. "My conduct," she said, "has been impeccable." "Your conduct has been theatrical, which is a thing my father warned me against in his last letter." "You have read me your father's letter once a week for 4 years. "Then perhaps it has begun, at last, to sink in." She set the teacup down. She rose. She crossed the room with the small, precise steps of a woman who had been taught to walk that way before she'd been taught to read. At the door she stopped, one hand on the polished brass. "You will not marry her, Adrian. I have invited Lady Frances Vane to stay through the month. You will not marry her." "I have not asked her, Mother. She has been in this house 90 minutes. I have not asked anyone." "You will not marry her." "I will marry," he said, after a measured beat. "The woman I judge most likely to make Wickham survive me, whoever she happens to be. Good night." The Duchess went out. The door closed. The Duke remained at the mantel for a long time, staring into the low, banked fire, listening to the rain that had begun again at the window. He was thinking, although he would not have admitted it to himself yet, of the way the loose curl at the girl's temple had brushed the hem of his mother's gown. He was thinking of how steadily she had said thank you. He was thinking that he was very, very tired of being the only person in this house who knew how to lift somebody to their feet. Clara woke before the maid came up. The fire had burned low, and the bedroom smelled faintly of cold ash and lavender. She lay still for a moment, listening to the rain ease against the window, and then she got out of bed, because lying still had never been a thing she was good at. There was a writing desk in the corner. There was a chair, upholstered in faded blue silk. There was a window seat with a view across a wet park to a beech wood, where a low mist had settled in the hollows. Clara stood at the glass with her bare feet on the cold boards and watched two riders come out from the trees, a tall one and a small one, the small one bouncing in the saddle, the tall one with one hand on the small one's bridle and the other lifted to point at something in the sky. The tall one, even at this distance, was unmistakably the Duke. The small one, after a second glance, was a child. She had not been told there was a child in the house. Susan came with hot water and the news that breakfast was laid in the morning room, that the Duke had been out riding at first light with Lord Henry. Her ladyship's grandson, miss. He lives here now. And that Mrs. Penn had said Clara was to feel free of the library. The library? Clara said. Susan paused with the towels over one arm. The water can steamed gently on the hearthstone. His Grace said so particular, miss. He said you was to be told. It was the first courtesy of the morning, and it had been planned. Clara took it. In the morning room, there were 3 places laid. 2 were empty. The third held a small, fair, grave-faced boy of perhaps 7, eating toast with the methodical seriousness of a man balancing a ledger. He looked up when Clara entered. He stood up. He bowed, very correctly, from the waist. "You are Miss Hartley," he said. "I am Henry Marchmont. My uncle says I am to look after you at breakfast because my grandmother has not come down." A small, grave bow from the small, grave boy. The room smelled of warm chocolate and toast, and the sharp green of box hedge cut at first light. "Thank you, Lord Henry," said Clara, and curtsied, the small curtsy a lady gives a small gentleman. He pulled out her chair. He had been taught by someone good. He poured her chocolate and pushed the toast rack towards her elbow. His fingers were small and tidy, and there was a faint smear of ink at the side of his thumb, where his tutor had not, that morning, scrubbed hard enough. "Did my grandmother make you kneel?" he asked, without any change of tone. Clara set down her cup. The porcelain clicked once, soft, against the saucer. "She asked me to curtsy low," she said carefully. "Yes," Henry said. "She does that. I think it is because she is angry that my papa went away and left me here. I do not think it is because of you." It was the most honest thing anyone had said to Clara since she had got into the carriage at the parsonage. She did not know what to do with it. She picked up her cup again to give her hands somewhere to be. "Your uncle was very kind," she said. Clara watched the small, careful fingers at work. "My uncle is mostly kind." Henry buttered another piece of toast with great care, edges first, the way a man of taste does it. "He is sometimes tired." Outside, a thrush in the box hedge said 3 notes and stopped. "Why is he tired?" "Because there is a great deal of money owed on the South Farms," Henry said, in the same calm tone he had bowed in, "and he has to ride out very early to look at the drains. He says I am to learn about the drains too, when I am older, because the drains are what hold up the house." Clara, who had been raised on a parson's stipend, who had watched her father patch the church roof with his own hands one wet October, found she could think of no better thing for a future earl to know than that. "He is right," she said. Henry took a careful sip of his chocolate. He set the cup down with both hands, the way he had clearly been told to. My uncle is mostly right, he said, with the small, judicial nod of a child who had thought about it. Except about porridge. He thinks porridge is good for you. It is not. She laughed. It surprised her more than him. When the Duke came in, he had changed out of riding things into a coat the colour of strong coffee, his hair still wet at the back from the pump. He bowed to Clara, and to Henry, same depth, same gravity, and sat down opposite. He drank his tea black, and ate one piece of bread with butter and no jam. Lord Henry has been keeping you in conversation, I hope? He has been very good to me, Clara said. I asked her if grandmother made her kneel, Henry put in helpfully. His uncle's teacup paused, very briefly, between saucer and mouth. Henry, she said only to curtsy low. The Duke's mouth tightened, almost imperceptibly, and then released, and he reached across the table and tapped his nephew very lightly on the wrist with the back of one knuckle. We do not discuss that at breakfast, Mr. Marchmont, nor at dinner. At what meal, then, may we discuss it? Henry considered. Tea? Tea, the Duke agreed, with great seriousness. Provided there are biscuits. Otherwise, no. Henry's face split, briefly, into the helpless grin of a 7-year-old who has tried very hard to be a grown man and has just been let off. He went back to his toast. Clara, looking down at her chocolate, felt the small, uninvited warmth of having understood something true about this house. At least 2 people in it were defending the child. You are an early riser, Miss Hartley, the Duke said, when Henry had been excused to his tutor. I have been one all my life. My father said it was the only honest hour. I am beginning to think your father and I would have liked each other very well. He spoke kindly of yours, Clara said, and meant it. He did not answer for a moment. He turned his teacup a half-quarter on its saucer. There is a matter, he said, that I would prefer we discuss now rather than later, while my mother is upstairs and we are not being observed. May I? Clara folded her napkin once, very precisely on her lap. Beyond the morning-room window, a gardener crossed the gravel with a heavy basket of cut roses. Please. He set the cup down. He looked at her, properly, for the first time in daylight. Up close, in the cold morning light, she could see that his eyes were not quite brown, but a sort of ringed hazel, dark at the rim, and that he had a small, very old scar at the corner of his lower lip, the kind a boy might get from being kicked by a pony. You were brought here, he said, ostensibly to receive the dowry my father provided for you in his will. You were brought here, in my mother's mind, to be inspected as a possible wife to me. I think it is fair you should know what is being decided about you in rooms you have not entered. I am sorry for that. It is not a thing I would have chosen. Clara waited. You should also know, he said, that I have no intention of being pushed into a marriage by my mother, and no intention, equally, of being pushed out of one by her. If we marry, you and I am not asking, I am only saying, it will be because we have both, in clear daylight, decided we would rather live in this house together than apart. Until then, you are a guest. You are owed a dowry. You will receive it whether you stay a week or stay a year. That is my father's wish, and it is also mine. Thank you, Your Grace. Adrian, we agreed. We did not, in fact, agree. He almost smiled. The small old scar at the corner of his mouth moved. Then I am asking now, will you call me Adrian in private? In private, she said, after a beat. I will call you Adrian. In company I shall use the title, since I do not wish your mother to have any further reason. He took up his cup and set it down on the saucer with a soft chine. That, he said, is exactly the answer I hoped you would give. He stood up. He bowed. I leave you to the library. Henry will be at his lessons until noon. My mother holds court in the small drawing room at 11, and would prefer the library not be visited then. If you wish to walk, ask Mrs. Penn. She will find you a maid. I am out until dusk on the home farm." At the door he paused. "Miss Hartley." She lifted her eyes. "Yes?" "Thank you for not crying yesterday. It would have been understandable, but I am glad you did not." He went out. The door closed. Clara sat at the breakfast table with her cup growing cold in her hand, and discovered, with a small and slightly indignant inward shock, that she had begun to like him. The library was 3 stories high and smelled of cedar and old paper, and the faint, distinct sweetness of the apple wood somebody had been burning in the grate the evening before. Clara stood for a moment on the threshold, the way a thirsty woman stands at a well. Then she went in. She had been a parson's daughter. There had been books in the parsonage, perhaps 200. She had read most of them twice, some until the spines cracked, and her mother had stitched the cracks with linen thread. The library at Wickham held thousands. The shelves climbed in galleries on 3 walls. There were a pair of long mahogany ladders on brass tracks, a globe twice as tall as a child, a long oak table down the middle with a green leather inlay. On the table, somebody, Adrian, she thought, without doubting it, had left out a folio, open at a hand-coloured plate of a heron, with a slip of paper marking the page and, on the slip, a single word in firm, slanted ink. Hartley. He had set the book out for her. He had set it out before she came down. She stood at the table for a long moment, one hand on the edge, and breathed in the smell of paper and wood and old fire, and felt, for the first time since the carriage door had opened, that she was not alone in this house. A door clicked at the far end of the long room. "Miss Hartley," said the Duchess of Wickham, who had not, it transpired, gone upstairs after all. "How prompt of you. I had hoped to find you here." Clara turned. Her face, she was relieved to find, did not heat. Her hand, on the table's edge, did not tighten. The night had given her something, a small, hard kernel of inward steadiness, and she felt it sit, now, just beneath her breastbone. "Your Grace?" The older woman's slipper made no sound at all on the long carpet. The smell of cedar and old paper followed her. "My son tells me," the Duchess said, walking towards her down the long carpet, "that I am to treat you as a guest in this house. I always treat my guests with great care. I thought we might have a short, friendly conversation about what guests in this house do and do not do." "Of course." "You will not, for example, walk alone with my son?" "I had not proposed to." A coal in the grate cracked, sharp and bright. "You will not ride out with him?" "I do not ride." "You will not dine with him without other ladies present?" "I have not yet dined at all." "And you will not, Miss Hartley?" The Duchess had reached the end of the table. She laid one slender white hand on the back of a leather chair. "Encourage in him the slightest impression that the daughter of a country parson might be a suitable Duchess of Wickham." Clara held her eyes. "And what shall I do, ma'am, if the impression is his and not mine?" The Duchess smiled. It was a perfectly composed smile, the kind a portraitist might have painted in 10 quick strokes. Her gloved hand tightened a quarter of an inch on the chair's leather back. "You will discourage it," she said. "Promptly, firmly, quietly, and in writing if I ask you to." "In writing." The clock above the library mantel struck the half-hour. The brass note hung in the cedar-smelling air a long second before it faded. A letter is a useful thing. It is dated. It survives a memory. There was a long second. The fire in the grate cracked once. A coal fell. "Your Grace," Clara said, "I will not write such a letter. I will, however, give you my word as my father's daughter that I shall offer the Duke no encouragement I would not offer any honest man. If he speaks to me, I will answer him. If he does not, I will not seek him. If he asks me to ride, I will tell him I do not ride. I cannot promise you more than that, and I think you would not, in your own house, respect a guest who could." The Duchess looked at her for a long time. The smile did not move. The eyes, very faintly, did. A coal in the grate at the far end of the library fell, soft, into its own ash. "My son," she said at last, "warned me you would be difficult." "He has not, ma'am, found me difficult yet." "He will." She turned. She walked the long carpet back to the door. At the door she paused, one hand on the brass, and said without looking round, "There is a ball in this house on Saturday week. 200 guests. Lady Frances Vane, who is my goddaughter and the daughter of an earl, will open it. You will attend. You will not dance with my son. You will wear what is provided for you, which will not be grey. Mrs. Penn will see to the gown. Good morning, Miss Hartley." The door closed. Clara stood for a long time at the table, with her hand on the open folio of the Heron. Then, very carefully, she turned to the page. There was a plate of a kingfisher beneath. Below it, in the same firm, slanted hand, a second slip of paper, dated that morning. "If you are reading this before noon, the kingfisher is on the river below the south meadow. Take the path past the chapel. He is usually there until the heat. A." Clara folded the slip into the small inner pocket of her gown. She left the library. She found Mrs. Penn. She asked for a maid, a cloak, and the path past the chapel. She did not, at any point that morning, write a letter. The path past the chapel ran along a low stone wall thick with cushions of yellow moss. The maid, Susan, walked 10 paces behind, as Mrs. Penn had instructed, and pretended to be very interested in a hedge. The sun had at last come out. The whole park was steaming. Clara could smell wet beech leaves and the cold sweetness of the river before she could see it. The Duke was sitting on a flat grey stone above the bend, in his shirt-sleeves, a coat folded on the moss beside him. He did not turn when she came up. He lifted one finger, very slightly, and pointed. The kingfisher sat on a willow root not 10 yards out, holding itself absolutely still above the dark, slow water. Even in the shadow, it burned blue. Clara stopped where she stood, because she had been told to. It dived. It came up with a small silver thing in its beak. It flew, in a low straight line, into the dark of the willow on the other bank, and was gone. "Oh," Clara said, quite quietly. "That is, in fact," said the Duke, "the correct response." He stood up. He shook out his coat. He did not put it on. "You have a maid," he observed. "Susan, my grandmother's orders." He almost smiled. The breeze off the water lifted a thread of his still damp hair and laid it back down. "My mother's. I forgive her, since the maid is 12 yards off, and I asked you to come somewhere we could not be observed." He glanced over Clara's shoulder. "Susan!" The hedge produced a small, startled rustle. "Your Grace?" came a small voice from behind a hedge. "Sit on that bench in the sun. Eat the bread and cheese you have in your pocket. If anyone asks, Miss Hartley and I were always within your sight." "Yes, Your Grace." A short, conscientious silence followed, in which Susan was clearly preparing the correct answer. Was she, in fact, within your sight? "Always, Your Grace." Excellent. The lie is more convincing if the answer comes quickly. Go and sit. He turned back to Clara, who was watching him with the careful, sideways attention of a woman trying to decide whether to be amused. "I am not corrupting your maid, Miss Hartley. I am only conserving her energy. She has been instructed to give my mother a full report of this conversation. She will give one. It will be a slightly edited one." "You bribe your servants in bread and cheese, Your Grace." "I bribe my servants in whatever they will accept. Mrs. Penn requires brandy. My undercoachman requires Tuesday afternoons off. And Susan requires bread and cheese. It is a system." She almost smiled. He saw it and looked away politely at the river. "I asked you to come," he said, "because I owe you a thing my mother would not let me say at breakfast. I owe you an explanation of why I knew exactly which chair would catch you yesterday when I lifted you off the carpet." A heron lifted, far down the bend, out of the brown water and into the white sky, and beat its slow way up over the willows. "Did you?" "It is always the same chair." He glanced at her. "She made my younger sister kneel there 4 years ago. She was 16. She had been brought into the drawing room to meet the man my mother had decided she would marry. She would not curtsy lower than her own self-respect allowed. She knelt instead. I was in Ireland on a commission and not at home. When I came back 3 weeks later, my sister had been sent to our aunt in Bath and had a fever for a month. The kingfisher came back out of the willow. They both watched it, because it was easier than looking at each other. A small fish, somewhere in the dark of the pool, rose for a fly and went under again with a soft, round plop. "Where is your sister now?" Clara asked. "Married. Happily, as it turns out. Not to the man my mother chose." The willow on the far bank gave up a brief shake of leaves to a breath of wind off the water. "Did you arrange it?" "I removed certain obstacles. The romance was hers." There was a small silence, in which the river spoke, and a crow somewhere up the wood remarked once on the morning. Then the Duke said, without looking round, "You did not kneel, Miss Hartley. Not really. Your knee touched the floor. Your head did not. I noticed." "My knee," Clara said, "was unanimous in its decision. I was outvoted." "You were outvoted with great dignity." "Thank you." "You are welcome." He turned and looked at her properly. The sun was full on his face now, and she could see he was not, in fact, very well slept. There was a faint blue beneath each eye, and a small new crease at the corner of his mouth that had not been there at breakfast. "Will you walk with me a little along the bank? I have not been near the river in 3 weeks. Henry is in lessons. My mother is in her drawing room. Susan will swear under oath that we did not leave her sight." "For 10 minutes." "For 10 minutes," he agreed. They walked. He did not offer his arm, and she did not take one. The path was narrow, and the moss slippery. Once, when she stepped on a loose stone, his hand came up to her elbow, very quick and very impersonal, and was gone again before she had time to colour. He showed her where the kingfisher nested. He showed her, with great seriousness, a flat slate above a green pool, where Henry had once caught a perch the length of his own forearm, and had refused to put it back, on the grounds that it would tell its friends. "And then?" she said. "Henry made me promise not to eat it. He took it back to the house in his pocket. It was, by the time we got there, no longer a fish." "What did you do with it?" "We buried it, under a yew in the orchard, with prayers. Henry conducted the service. I held the trowel. I am told there is now a small wooden cross. He visits." She laughed, low, surprised at herself. The Duke watched her laugh, and the small new crease at the corner of his mouth eased, very slightly, and he said, almost as if to himself, "That is twice." "Twice what?" "Twice I have made you laugh in one morning. I shall begin to keep a tally." A long-tailed tit threaded itself, fast and pale, through the willow brush above his head. "You are very confident, Your Grace." "I am not confident. I am simply paying attention. They are different things." He stopped walking. "Miss Hartley, I would like to ask you, plainly, since we are by a river and there is no one within earshot but Susan, who is asleep on a bench. Are you frightened of my mother?" Clara considered the question. The river kept moving. A leaf turned in the slow water at her feet. "Now," she said at last. "Not exactly. I was last night. I am not today. I am wary. I do not think she means to be kind to me. I think she will try, in the next 10 days, to make me leave this house under my own power. And I think she will do it, not by anger, but by patience. I think she has been doing this for 30 years, and that I have been doing it for none." "You have," he said. "A very accurate eye, Miss Hartley." "I had a long bath last night." He laughed at that, sudden and real, the first time she had heard it, and the sound was deeper than she had expected, and warmer, and broken at the edges by some small private dryness that lived behind it. "A bath," he said, "is in fact a very useful kind of study. I must remember it the next time I have to negotiate with the tenants over a drain." "A drain?" "Henry will have told you. The drains, Miss Hartley, are what hold up the house." "He did." "He is correct." They had reached the chapel at the top of the path. Susan was visible on her bench a short way off, head tilted back in the sun, very plainly not asleep. The Duke stopped at the chapel gate. "I will go back to the home farm now," he said. "I will be in to dinner. My mother will have arranged for Lady Frances Vane to arrive at 3 with her aunt. You will be expected to receive her." "I am sorry." "I expected it." "You will, when she arrives, find her not unkind." "Will I?" "She is 23. She has been told since she was 12 that she would be Duchess of Wickham. She has herself no opinion in the matter. She is not stupid. She has a horse she loves, and a sister who teases her, and an embroidery she keeps in a brown silk bag. She will not, I think, be your enemy. My mother will try to make her so. Resist that, if you can. I am not asking you to be friends. I am asking you not to be cruel." "I am not, as a rule, cruel, Your Grace." "I had already noticed that," he said. "It is, in fact, the principal evidence in your favor." He bowed. He went away across the field, walking fast, coat slung over one shoulder, the white of his shirt very bright against the wet green. Clara stood at the chapel gate, with Susan trotting up behind her, and she found she could feel her own pulse in her wrists, and she could not say with any certainty whether that was a good thing or a bad. Lady Frances Vane arrived at 3, with her aunt, Lady Cherwell, with 2 trunks, with a maid, and with a small brown spaniel called Mustard, who took one look at the great front hall and threw up on the marble. Lady Frances laughed, a real laugh, embarrassed and easy, and went down on her knees on the cold floor herself, with a handkerchief and a footman's apology, and cleaned it up, before the Duchess could come down the stairs to greet her. By the time the Duchess descended, Mustard was in a basket by the fire, and Lady Frances was on her feet again, pink and unflustered, and the marble was very nearly dry. "My dear child," the Duchess said, kissing her on both cheeks, "I have told you 100 times the footman will do that. It was Mustard's, Aunt Hortensia. It seemed only fair." She was small. She was very fair, the kind of fair that goes pink in any weather. Her gown was a soft dove blue, and her hair was the colour of clean honey, and her eyes, when she turned to Clara, were a candid, wide grey. "You are Miss Hartley," Lady Frances said. "I am very glad to meet you. I was told there was a kingfisher this morning. Did you see it?" "I did." "Oh, good. I was afraid the Duke had invented it. He invents things when he is bored." "He does not invent kingfishers, my dear," said the Duchess with iron sweetness. "He merely uses them. Miss Hartley, this is my goddaughter, Lady Frances Vane. Frances, Miss Hartley is the daughter of an old family friend. She is with us for the month." "For the month? How splendid! I have brought 4 books, and I have already finished 2. We shall have a great deal to discuss." It was offered without any side at all. Clara looked at the small, candid, pink-cheeked face and understood, with a quick and slightly unhappy clarity, what the Duke had meant. Lady Frances would not be her enemy. Lady Frances did not, in any plain sense, know how to be anyone's enemy. The Duchess's eyes, sliding from one to the other of them, did not quite hide her satisfaction. "Frances will rest before dinner," the Duchess said. "Miss Hartley, you will help me sort the seating cards for Saturday week. The library, after tea. Come, Frances." She swept Lady Frances away. Mustard was carried up by the footman in his basket. Clara stood in the hall under the great clock and let out, very quietly, the breath she had been holding since the carriage wheels had crunched on the gravel outside. Mrs. Penn appeared at her elbow, with a small, almost imperceptible nod, the first the housekeeper had given her, and said in her practised, soft voice, "Tea in the small parlour, Miss Hartley, by yourself. His Grace has asked particular." "Thank you, Mrs. Penn." The housekeeper looked at her for a long moment. Her mouth did the very small motion of a woman who has spent 30 years deciding whether or not to say a thing. "His Grace's mother," she said at last, "is not, miss, a woman who has been told no in this house since her husband was lost to her. You will have to choose, in the next 10 days, whether you mean to say it. And if I do, then I will bring you brandy in your tea, miss, and a hot brick for your bed. I have been here 41 years. I know how the rooms get cold." She made the tiniest curtsy, more habit than respect, and went. Clara took her tea in the small parlour alone, and watched the rain come back across the park, and began, in the careful, inward way her father had taught her, to make a list. The days that followed went past at the speed of small things. There were morning rides she did not take, and afternoon visits she did. There was a small dinner of 14, at which Clara was seated at the far end below an elderly canon, who told her a complete history of every barony in Wiltshire. The Duke was at the head. The Duchess was at his right. Lady Frances was at his left. Clara, when she lifted her eyes once during the second course, found his already on her. Only for a moment, only long enough to incline his head a quarter of an inch, and then his attention had returned to Lady Cherwell. She walked with Henry every morning before breakfast. It had been the Duke's quiet suggestion, conveyed by a folded note tucked into her napkin on the second day. Henry would benefit from the company of a woman who could read aloud. She read him Mr. Gulliver. She read him the parts of the natural history that had pictures. She read him, once, the opening of a novel her father had disapproved of. And Henry, who was very serious about novels, told her that he thought, on the whole, his uncle would prefer she stopped at chapter 4. She stopped at chapter 4. She did not walk alone with the Duke again. He had not asked. She had not, when twice she might have, contrived to be where he would be. The Kingfisher returned, on Saturday morning, to the willow root. Susan, sent on a small errand to the river to look for moss for a flower arrangement, reported the news to Clara at the breakfast table. Clara folded her napkin and went on with her tea. Lady Frances, who was buttering toast for Henry, did not appear to listen, but her hand, on the small silver butter spreader, slowed by a quarter beat, and Clara saw it, and was almost sorry. It was, Clara thought, the loneliest morning she had spent in her life. The ball was on the Saturday after that. The house had been in motion for 3 days, chandeliers down, chandeliers polished, chandeliers back up, and the ballroom, when she saw it on the morning of the ball, looked nothing like the long, quiet room she had crossed 3 times that week with a book under her arm. It looked like a room from a story. The dress Mrs. Penn brought up to her room at 6 was a pale primrose silk, very plain, very well cut. It was not grey. It was not, in fact, a colour Clara had ever owned. She stood in front of the long glass in the dressing room and let Susan tie the small velvet ribbon under her bodice, and looked at the woman in the mirror with the kind of polite, cool interest one might use for a stranger seen across a square. The woman in the mirror was tall. The woman in the mirror had her father's level eyes and her mother's mouth, and a small, steady colour in her cheeks that had nothing to do with rouge. The woman in the mirror, Clara realized after a long moment, looked like a duchess. "Susan." The maid's freckled face appeared in the glass behind her. "Miss?" "Tighter." Susan's hands hesitated at the ribbons. The fire in the dressing room threw small, warm shadows on the wall. "I have it as tight as it will go, miss." "Tighter still." Susan tightened. The bodice took half an inch off the waist. The line of the dress went, suddenly, very clean. Now the pearls. Her Grace did not send pearls, miss. My mother's pearls. The small grey ones, in the velvet roll at the bottom of my trunk. Susan brought them. They had belonged to Clara's mother, and to her mother's mother before her, and they were not particularly fine, and they were the colour of the river at dusk. Clara fastened them herself. They sat against her throat like a small declaration of where she had come from. There, she said. Susan looked at her, then looked again, and then said, in a tone of pure and slightly awed surprise, Miss, they will not know what to do with you. The carriages had been arriving since 7. By 8:45, the great staircase was full of light and people, and the ballroom had begun to fill, and the music had begun. Soft at first, a quartet on the dais by the long windows. Clara came down the staircase with Lady Frances on her right and Lady Cherwell on her left, because the Duchess had so arranged the procession, and at the foot of the staircase the Duchess herself stood in cloth of silver, very tall, very straight, every inch of her stating without a word that the woman who had asked a parson's daughter to kneel 5.5 days ago had not, in the interval, changed her mind about anything at all. The Duke was beside her. He had on the dark blue coat that was the Wickham colour, and a plain white waistcoat, and a single ring on the smallest finger of his left hand that had been his father's. He was greeting guests. He had not yet seen Clara on the stairs. A footman passed with a tray of champagne. The crystal made a small, bright clink as he set it down on the side table. Miss Hartley, said Lady Frances, very low, beside her. You look beautiful. I mean it. I did not expect to. That is the kindest thing anyone has said to me in a week. Lady Frances laughed, soft and surprised. I had thought you would wear grey again. My godmother told me you would. Your godmother is, on this one occasion, mistaken. They reached the bottom of the stairs. The Duchess turned, with the immense, unhurried turn of a ship coming about, and her eyes took in Clara, the primrose silk, the pearls at the throat, the line of the bodice that was not quite the line that had been altered, and a small white tension showed at the corner of her mouth, and was, almost at once, smoothed away. Miss Hartley, she said, how pretty you have made yourself. Thank you, Your Grace. That is not, I believe, the silk Mrs. Penn fitted on you. It is the same silk. It has been taken in by an inch. By whose authority? By mine. The Duchess's eyes, very faintly, narrowed. And the pearls? My mother's, Your Grace. She would have wished me to wear them. They are quite small. They are. They are also paid for. There was a beat. Behind the Duchess, the Duke had at last looked round, and his face, when he saw Clara, did the small, betraying thing faces do when their owners have not arranged them in advance. He turned away again almost at once, to a Mr. Wyburn from Salisbury, but Clara had seen it, and the Duchess had seen Clara see it, and Lady Frances had seen everything, and Lady Cherwell, who had been talking about the weather to no one in particular, fell into a thoughtful silence. The first dance was a quadrille. The Duke led Lady Frances out. He danced well. She had not, before tonight, known whether he would. And Lady Frances danced like a girl who had been taught by an excellent master and never asked whether she wanted the lessons. They were a handsome pair. The whole room saw it. Clara saw it, and stood by a pillar with a glass of lemon water in her hand, and did not let her face change. When the quadrille was over, he brought Lady Frances back to our aunt and crossed the room to Clara without hurry. He bowed, the same bow, the same depth, and said very low, just under the music, "Will you take the next dance, Miss Hartley?" "Your mother has asked me not to." "I am aware of that." "I gave her my word I would offer you no encouragement. I would not offer any honest man." "I am, I hope, an honest man." "Your Grace." "Adrian. Tonight, especially. Please." She lifted her eyes. He was, in fact, the gravest she had seen him. Adrian, if I dance with you tonight, your mother will not forgive me. I do not, for myself, care for her forgiveness. But Henry lives in this house, and Lady Frances is a kinder girl than either of us deserves, and the consequences will be paid by them, and not by us. I have thought of that, and I have decided the consequences will be paid by me. I am the head of this family. The cost falls on me. I have made it fall on me before, and the house is still standing. Will you dance? It was not, in the end, a question. She set down her glass on the small marble side table. She put her hand in his. The music began. It was a country dance, the kind in which the lines crossed and the partners changed and crossed back, and so they were never very long alone in any one figure. And yet the room understood, immediately, what it was watching. The Duchess, beside her godchild, did not move. Lady Frances did not move. The elderly canon, who was sitting with the chaperons, lowered his glass of negus and stopped, at last, talking about Wiltshire baronies. Even Mrs. Penn, watching from the door, did not move. The dance ended. The Duke bowed. Clara curtsied. It was a perfectly ordinary curtsy, neither high nor low, the curtsy a lady gives a gentleman who has danced one set with her. The Duchess walked, very slowly, the length of the ballroom, and held out her hand to her son. The Duchess's silver gown caught all the candlelight at once as she moved. "Adrian," she said, "you will take me into the supper room." "Mother, now." He bowed to Clara, again no deeper than before. He gave his arm to his mother. They went out through the great double doors at the south end. The music began again. The dancing resumed. Lady Frances, after a small moment of looking at the floor, came over to Clara and took her arm, plain and easy. "You dance better than I do," she said. "Will you walk me to the lemonade, please? I am about to disappoint a great many people, and I should rather not do it on an empty stomach." "Lady Frances, honestly. We have a quarter of an hour, perhaps less, before my godmother comes back and decides what is to be done with me. I should like to use it, if you do not mind, to be friends." "I do not mind at all." "Good." She paused. "I have decided, by the way, about my godmother. I shall not marry your Duke." "He is not mine, Frances." "He is, you know," said Lady Frances, with the calm certainty of a girl who had been watching country dances since she was 9. "He has been since the second figure, possibly since the first. The room knew, I knew. I think even my dog knew, and my dog is in a basket 2 stories up. Lemonade, please." In the supper room, the Duchess of Wickham sat very still on a gilt chair, in cloth of silver, and the Duke stood opposite her with his hands clasped at the small of his back, and the small army of footmen withdrew to the walls without being told. "You danced with her?" The fire in the supper-room grate had been built up against the cold of the long marble corridors. The light off it lay warm and shifting on the cloth of silver of the older woman's sleeve. "I did." "You publicly chose her, in this house, in front of 200 witnesses, including the Earl of Cherwell's daughter." He did not look at the fire. He looked at the small portrait of his father above the chimney-piece. "I danced one set." "You danced the country dance, Adrian, not the cotillion. The country dance, a village dance, with a parson's child, in primrose silk that I did not provide, while Lady Frances Vane stood with her aunt by the pillar and watched. Lady Frances was, when I last looked, on the arm of Miss Hartley going for lemonade. They appear to be friends." "You will not marry her." He set his hand on the cold marble of the mantel. The fire warmed his fingers and did nothing for his face. "I am beginning to think, Mother, that I shall." The Duchess did not, this time, set down her glass. She held it. She held it for a long second, in which her hand did not tremble. And then she did set it down, very gently, on the little marble table beside her. exactly as she had set down her teacup a week before. "Then I will not, Adrian, be at the wedding." "That," he said, "is your prerogative." "And I shall, before that wedding, take steps." "Mother." "I have taken steps before. You know it. I shall take them again." He looked at her for a long second. He had grown, in that second, very still and very white. "What steps?" She rose from her gilt chair. The cloth of silver caught the firelight and threw it across the polished oak of the supper table in a single bright line. "You shall see, in your own time, what steps. Go back to your country dance, Adrian. You have a guest waiting for lemonade." He went back. He had to. The night had to be finished, however badly it had begun. He bowed to Clara. He danced once with Lady Cherwell, because it was civil. He did not, for the rest of the evening, dance with Clara again. He could not. The room had already seen what it had seen, and one more set would have been a vow. At 1 in the morning, the last carriage rolled away under the porte-cochere. At 1:30, the chandeliers were being let down on their long brass chains. At 1:45, Clara, still in her primrose silk, came down the back stairs because she had not, in the noise and the music, been able to bring herself to undress. The Duke was in the small library by the green room, alone, with a single candle. He did not seem surprised to see her. He stood when she came in. He bowed. "Miss Hartley, you should not be here." "I know." "My mother has gone to bed. I asked Mrs. Penn." "You bribed Mrs. Penn?" "I gave her 10 minutes of company in the still room and listened to a story about her sister. It is, I find, the same system." He almost laughed. He did not, quite. He set down the book that had been open on his knee and crossed the small carpet to her and stopped at the polite distance he had stopped at every time before and said, a long, slow look. The clock somewhere in the small hours struck 2 and stopped. "What do you want, Clara?" It was the first time he had used her name. The fire spoke once between them, a small crack of pine resin in the grate, and the smell of it sweetened the cold air of the little library. She found her voice was perfectly steady, the way it had been the first night on the carpet, the way it had been at the river, the way it had been at the foot of the great staircase in her mother's pearls. The single candle on the small mahogany table guttered in some unseen draught. The shadows on the book spines slid an inch and held. "I want to know," she said, "what your mother meant by steps." He looked at her for a long time. The candle moved between them. "She means," he said at last, "that she has in a drawer in her writing desk a letter from your father to my father, written 4 months before my father was lost. It is a private letter between 2 old friends. My father loved it. He kept it under glass in his study. After his last illness, my mother took it down and put it in her drawer. I have never read it. She has, more than once, threatened to read parts of it aloud at dinner if I went against her wishes in some matter. I have always, until tonight, gone with her wishes in the matters she chose." "A letter," Clara said. "A letter." The fire whispered between them. A thread of smoke from the new coal climbed straight up the chimney throat. "From my father to yours?" "Yes." She rubbed the cold of her own palm with her thumb, very slowly, an old habit her father had teased her for as a child. "Why does it matter?" He was silent for a long time. He looked, in the candlelight, suddenly much younger than he was. The boy he had been at 12, Babs, when he had got the small scar at the corner of his lower lip. "Because in it," he said, "your father wrote to mine, not long before he was taken ill, a confession he had made to no one else, about a thing he had done when he was a very young man, before he was a clergyman, before he was your father, a thing he repented of, a thing he had no part of in the rest of his life. My father forgave him on the spot, by return of post, and the matter was set aside between them. Your father went on to be the man he was. My father went out of this world loving him. But the words are in the letter. What words? I will not tell you, he said quietly. Not because I do not trust you, because they are not mine to repeat, and because I will not let my mother be the person who first speaks them in your hearing, in a room she has chosen. If she reads that letter aloud, Clara, she means to make you ashamed of him. She breathed in. The cold of the small library smelled of beeswax and the dry sweetness of old paper, and somewhere, very far above, on the second floor, a door closed. My father, said Clara after a moment, has been at rest these 8 years. I am not, I find, ashamed of him. You may be, when you hear it. Then I shall be. And I shall, when I am, still be his daughter. And I shall, even so, marry the man who lifted me off the carpet, if that man asks. The Duke looked at her. He did not move. He did not, this time, bow. Clara. He spoke her name softly, the way a man tries the weight of a new tool in his hand. Her own pulse, in the hollow of her throat, ticked once against the chill of her mother's pearls. Yes. That man is asking. The candle on the small library table burned down a thread of wax onto the brass cup. I had hoped he was. He has, at this exact moment, no idea what he is about to inherit. He has farms that are losing money. He has a mother who will not forgive him. He has a nephew who is afraid of porridge. He has a house with too many drains, and a sister in Bath who writes him long, unfunny letters about her husband's hounds. He has, in fact, nothing very romantic to offer at all. He has, in fact, asked me a question. He laughed. It was the same low, surprised laugh from the riverbank, and it broke a little, and he came one step nearer, and stopped, because they were both, even at this distance, very aware of the candle, and the door, and the house. Will you marry me, Clara Hartley, knowing what I know? I will, she said, knowing what I know, which is, I think, almost as much. He took her hand. He did not kiss it. He held it for a long second in both of his. They were warm and dry, and the small old scar on the corner of his lip moved as he smiled, just barely. And then he let it go. Go to bed, he said. I will speak to my mother in the morning, before anyone else, before the post. You will not be in the room. You will not, for any reason, come in if you hear voices. Do you understand me? I understand you. Good. He bowed. He bowed properly. He bowed as he had bowed to her in the drawing room the first afternoon, when he had said welcome to Wickham. Good night, Miss Hartley. Good night, Your Grace. She went up the back stairs in her primrose silk. She did not, on the way, meet anyone. She undressed without Susan, who was asleep on a truckle in the next room, with the dog Mustard, who had been adopted, curled against her knee. She lay down in the dark, with her mother's pearls beside her on the night table, and she did not, for a long time, sleep. Somewhere in the house, in a writing desk in a small upstairs room, was a letter she had never been told about, from a father she had loved as well as a daughter has ever loved her father. And somewhere in the same house, in a small library by the green room, a man she had agreed to marry was sitting with one candle and a book he was not reading, waiting for morning. Morning came. It came with a thin grey light at the window, and the smell of cold ash from the fire, and the small, distant rattle, 2 stories down, of a fire iron in the kitchen grate. Clara dressed quickly. She did not call Susan. She put on the plain grey gown she had arrived in, and her travelling boots, and pinned up her hair with the same 3 pins her mother had used to pin hers. And she went down the back stairs because she did not want to be seen. She did not, however, go to the green room. She went instead to the small upstairs writing room at the end of the long corridor, The one Mrs. Penn had pointed out to her on the first day, as Her Grace's private morning room. The door was unlocked. The room was empty. The fire had been lit. The writing desk by the window was a small, bow-fronted thing in walnut, with 3 small drawers down the left side. Clara stood for a long moment in the doorway. She thought, very clearly, about what her father would have said about a woman who walked into another woman's writing room before dawn to look in her drawers. He would have said, she rather thought, but the matter was not as simple as it looked. She did not open the drawers. She crossed the carpet instead, and she sat down at the writing desk in the chair that was not hers, and she took up a clean sheet of paper from the rack, and she dipped a pen, and she began to write. Your Grace, I have not opened the drawers of this desk. I could have. I came down expressly to do it, and at the door I changed my mind. Whatever is in them is yours. It will remain yours. If my father wrote a letter to your husband, and your husband loved it well enough to keep under glass, then that letter is a thing between 2 old friends now beyond our reach. And I am not, even on my own behalf, willing to be the third party to it. I have, however, come here to say a thing your son has not yet had occasion to say in your hearing. I have, last night, accepted his proposal of marriage. I did so before I knew the letter existed, and I would do so again now knowing it exists. I do not know what is in it. I will not read it if you offer. I will not allow it to be read aloud at a dinner, in a drawing room, or in any other room of this house, in my hearing or out of it. If you choose to read it aloud anyway, I will leave the room. If you choose to publish it, I will not read the page. My father, Your Grace, was a man I knew. Whatever a younger man wrote about himself before he was that man does not, for me, touch him. I write this so that if you mean to use the letter against him, you may know in advance that it will not work upon me. I write it also because I owe you, as the mother of the man I am to marry, the courtesy of not being surprised by his decision in front of 200 guests. You were surprised once in this house, last night, by a country dance. It was not a kindness. I should prefer not to repeat the unkindness, even by accident. I shall be in the small parlour at 9. If you wish to speak to me before you speak to your son, I shall be there. If you wish never to speak to me again, I shall, as your son's wife, find that very sad. But I shall not, I think, find it surprising. I should like very much for it not to be so. Yours sincerely, Clara Hartley. She folded the sheet. She wrote Her Grace, the Duchess of Wickham, across the front in her best hand. She set the letter on the writing desk, square in the middle, where it could not be missed. She rose. She went out. She closed the door behind her without a sound. Down in the small parlour, Mrs. Penn was already there, banking up the fire, and she looked up when Clara came in, hard, and said, "Brandy and the tea, miss? And a hot brick for your feet?" "Yes, please, Mrs. Penn." She went out. She came back with the tea and the brandy and the brick, and arranged Clara in the wing chair by the fire. At the door, she paused. "His Grace has been in the morning room since 6. He does not, miss, know you are here. Her Grace has not yet come down." She closed the door. Clara sat with her hands wrapped round the cup and waited. At 9, the Duchess of Wickham came in. She had on a grey morning gown the colour of cold ash. She had a folded sheet of paper in her hand. Her face was very still and very white, and the small white tension at the corner of her mouth, which had appeared in the supper-room last night, had not, in the interval, gone. She closed the door behind her. She did not sit. "Miss Hartley." The older woman's voice was thinner than it had been the day before. The fire warmed neither of them. "Your Grace." "You did not open the drawers?" "I did not." "You wrote a letter instead?" "I did." "It is," the Duchess said, very slowly, as if she were turning the sentence over in her hand, the way one turns a thin piece of porcelain to look at the maker's mark. "A better letter, Miss Hartley, than I had supposed you capable of writing. Thank you, Your Grace. The Duchess pressed one hand to her own throat, just at the small hollow above the silver chain. It was not exactly a compliment. I shall take it as one, nonetheless. There was a long beat. The Duchess crossed to the chair opposite Clara's. She sat down. She set the folded letter on her knee. She put her hands flat upon it. She did not, for a long second, look at Clara at all. She looked at the fire. I had this morning, she said, intended to do you a great deal of harm. I know. You will not, I take it, ask me what the letter contains. I will not. You are certain? I am certain. Why? Clara set down her cup. She thought about the question. She thought about it properly, the way her father had taught her to think about questions. And then she said, Because, Your Grace, what is in that letter is true, or it is not true. If it is true, my father confessed it to a friend before the end of his own life, and his friend forgave him, and the matter, as your son said last night, was set aside. If it is not true, then it is a young man's misremembering of himself, and ought never to have been written down. Either way, it is not, today, in this room, my business. It is not, today, in this room, yours either. It is, today, in this room, only my father's, and he has lain at rest these 8 years, and he has passed being defended by any letter I might write, or any drawer you might open. The Duchess did not move. You are not, she said at last, what I had thought you were. A long silence. The fire in the grate spoke once, soft into the silence. I am, Your Grace, exactly what my father raised. You did not know my father? No, I did not. She lifted her hands from the letter. She picked it up. She looked at it, once, as if she were not quite sure how it had come to be in her lap, and then, very deliberately, she leaned forward and dropped it into the fire. Clara did not move. She did not even breathe. The paper caught at one corner. The flame walked along the fold. The seal, which was an old red seal with a crest on it, melted and ran down and was gone. In a moment, the whole letter was a piece of black lace curling on the coals, and in another moment, it was nothing at all. The Duchess sat back. She closed her eyes. She looked, for the first time since Clara had met her, like a woman of 62 years, and not like a portrait of one. I have, she said, been a bad mother to my son for a long time. I knew it the day I took that letter out of its glass and put it in a drawer. I knew it again the day I asked you to curtsy lower. I have, in fact, known it for many years, and I have, for many years, found it easier to be ferocious than to be wrong. Your Grace, please, let me finish. I am not, by training, a woman who finishes such sentences. I shall not, I think, manage another like it. She opened her eyes. She looked at Clara. I shall be at the wedding, Miss Hartley. I shall sit in the front pew. I shall, in the drawing room afterwards, before whoever you have invited, ask you to forgive me, in the same voice, and in the same room, and in the same place where I ask you to kneel. That is the apology I am able to offer. It is not enough. It is what I have. Clara, after a long second, found her voice. It is, Your Grace, more than enough. The Duchess looked at the small, charred curl of paper at the back of the grate, and at her own steady hand, and at nothing in particular. It is not, but it is what I have. I shall now go and tell my son. He has, I imagine, been waiting for a tray to be thrown at his head since 6. He shall, instead, have his mother's blessing and a quiet breakfast. I am sorry for the long way round. She stood. At the door she stopped. She did not turn. Miss Hartley. Yes, Your Grace. The pearls, last night, were they really your mother's? They were. They suited you. She went out. The door closed. Clara sat with the cup in her hand and watched the last of the black lace fall through the coals to the back of the grate, and discovered, after a moment, that she was crying. Not loudly, not all at once, but steadily and without theatre, the way a woman cries who has been holding her shoulders straight for 9 days. The Duke found her there at 10. He did not ask why she was crying. He sat down opposite her. He took her hand. He held it the way he had held it last night by the candle, in both of his, and he said, very quietly, "My mother has been to see me." "I know." "She has asked, in particular, that I tell you the banns will be read for the first time on Sunday in the chapel, and that she will, herself, be present." "That is very generous." "It is what she has." "Adrian?" "Yes." "The letter." "She told me. She told me also that she has burned it. I am almost sorry. I should have liked, once, to know what was in it." He thought about it. "On reflection, no, I should not. My father loved your father, and that is the only sentence in the matter that signifies." He kissed her hand. It was the first time. He did it gravely, without flourish, the way a man might set a candle in a window. He let her hand go. "Will you come and walk in the orchard with me, Clara? Henry is there. He has, I am told, brought a trowel. I am not at liberty to say why." "The perch." "The perch." "I should be delighted." They walked in the orchard. Henry was indeed there. He had brought the trowel. He had decided, after long consideration in his lessons that morning, that the small wooden cross under the U was no longer quite straight and required adjustment. The Duke held the trowel. Clara held Henry's coat. Henry, with great seriousness, adjusted the cross by exactly 1 finger's width and pronounced himself satisfied, and asked his uncle, in the tone of a man closing the meeting of a small parish committee, whether they should now go and look at the kingfisher. They went and looked at the kingfisher. It was on the willow root. It dived. It caught its small silver thing. It flew, in the same low, straight line, into the dark of the willow on the other bank. Henry, between his uncle and Clara, holding one of each of their hands, watched it go, and said, "Are you going to be my aunt now?" "Yes," Clara said. "Good. I was hoping you would. May I call you Clara when nobody is listening?" "You may call me Clara when anyone is listening." He thought about this. He nodded gravely. He pulled them both, gently and with great certainty, on along the bank to look at the place the water rats had built their fortress. The Duke said nothing for a long time. When at last he spoke, it was low, and to Clara, and only after Henry had run ahead by 20 paces to look at a moorhen. "This," he said, "is what I wanted you to see, before any of the rest of it. Henry between us. The willow, the river, the cross under the U. This, you, me. 6 o'clock on a Saturday morning, with the dew still on the grass, and nothing in the world to do for the next hour but watch a kingfisher and a small boy, and each other. If we are very lucky, Clara, this will be most of the rest of our lives. I should like very much for you to know that this is what I am asking you to have." She looked at him. He was, in the slanted morning light, the same lean, dark-eyed man who had pulled her off the carpet 10 days ago, with the same small old scar at the corner of his mouth, and the same hazel-ringed eyes, and the same quiet hand at his side that had earlier in the day held hers, as if it were a small bird he had decided not to crush. "I know," she said. "I am having it." He smiled. It was a slow, real smile. The smile he had smiled at the river when he had told her about the perch. He did not, this time, look away. "Good," he said. "Henry has found a moorhen. We must, by treaty, go and admire it. They went and admired the moorhen. It was a perfectly ordinary moorhen. Henry was delighted. Clara, between the Duke and the small boy, and the wet green field, and the slow river, and the kingfisher somewhere behind them in the willow, allowed herself, for a moment, to feel happy. She walked back to the house between the Duke and Henry, and was happy for a quarter of an hour. The letter was waiting on the silver tray in the front hall when they came in. It was addressed to her by her own name, in a hand she did not know. The seal was a plain red wafer. She picked it up because Mrs. Penn was at the door taking the Duke's hat, and Henry was struggling out of his small boots, and the footman was standing very politely waiting. And a letter on a silver tray is, in a great house, a thing one picks up. She slipped it into the pocket of her grey gown without breaking the seal. She did not immediately think about it. She went up to change. She broke the seal in her own room, by the window, alone. The maid Susan had gone down for hot water. The hand was a man's hand, old, slightly shaky, the ink a little brown. The salutation was very plain. The signature, at the bottom of the second page, was a man called Edward Pelham of Lincoln. She had never, in her life, heard the name. She read the letter twice. The first time she read it, standing at the window, in the slant of the morning sun. The second time she read it, sitting on the window seat with her back against the cold glass, and her knees drawn up under her grey skirt, like a girl of 15. When she had finished the second reading, she folded the letter very neatly along its own creases, and put it back in its envelope, and laid the envelope on the small table by the bed. She did not, after the second reading, weep. She did not, after the second reading, do anything at all. The letter said, in 3 carefully composed pages, that James Hartley, of Little Compton, late Reverend of that parish, had, at the age of 19, when he and Edward Pelham had been students together at the College of St. John in the town of Cambridge, conspired with a certain young lady of the town to sign her name to a small note of credit at a milliner's, in order that he might buy himself a coat and pay his quarterly accounts. The lady had not known what she was signing. She had been, the writer was careful to record, very young, and very fond of James Hartley, and had signed because she trusted him. Her hand had been steady. Her smile, as the ink dried on the paper, had been the smile of a girl who had been told she was being teased. The note had been honoured by her father, who had paid it without question. The lady herself, finding out by accident 2 years later, had been gravely hurt, had broken off all correspondence with the said James Hartley, and had married a clergyman of her own choosing, and had lived, by all accounts, a long, quiet life in a small stone vicarage in the Fens. James Hartley had paid back the money, in full, by post, in the 3rd year of his curacy at Little Compton. The matter, at the time, had been considered closed between gentlemen. The lady had now lain 6 years in her own churchyard. Her husband had lain 3. The letter's author, Edward Pelham, had been present at none of it, except at the original signing of the note in the milliner's shop, where he had stood, at 19, in the doorway, and had watched. He had said nothing then. He was saying everything now, because, he wrote at the bottom of the second page, it did not seem to him proper that a young woman should marry into the Wickham family in ignorance of the kind of man who had fathered her, nor that she should remain unaware of the particular debt her own existence owed to a woman now in her grave, whose name was never cleared. There was a postscript. The postscript said, in smaller handwriting, that the writer had no wish to make the matter public, that he did not propose to write to His Grace the Duke of Wickham, nor to His Grace's mother, nor to any newspaper. The postscript said that he had felt it sufficient to write to Clara herself. The postscript said that he wished her every happiness in her marriage. Clara sat on the window seat for a long time after she had folded the letter. The sun moved a little on the boards. Susan came up with the hot water and went out again without speaking, because Clara had not lifted her head. Somewhere down in the house a clock struck 11, and then, much later, 12. She did not move. She had been raised by her father. She had been taught by her father to read, to think, to ride a pony, to mend a fence, to tell the truth, to take the sacrament, to forgive an injury, and to remember a kindness. She had buried her father at the age of 17, in the small graveyard behind the church he had served for 31 years. She had stood at his open grave in a black bonnet borrowed from her aunt, and she had thought, as the spade had taken the first heavy slice of clay, that she had never known a man more honest in her life. She had been wrong. She had been wrong all along. She had been carrying the wrong father in her head for 8 years, and the man under the grass had been somebody else. Somewhere in Lincoln, a man she had never met had decided to inform her of it 3 weeks before her wedding, and there was now no part of her own past that she could trust. Her father had stolen from a girl who had loved him. Her father had stolen from a girl who had loved him, and the girl had been blamed by her own father, and the girl had carried that wound into a marriage and into a grave. Her father had paid the money back in coin, and had never, in 31 years, mentioned it again to anyone, including the daughter he had raised on the verses of St. Paul. Her father had lied to her every day she had known him, by not telling her. Her father had lied to himself every day he had stood in his pulpit. Her father. And the cold settled now under her ribs, the cold of the river on the day she had seen the kingfisher. Her father had been, all along, a man capable of doing the thing the letter described. He had done it. He had done it once. Once was enough. And it was now, sitting on the window seat with the sun moving on the boards and the letter on the small table by the bed, that the second cold came. The Duchess of Wickham had known. The Duchess of Wickham had known for years. She had had the other letter in her drawer, and Adrian had said his father had loved your father, and the two old men had buried it between them, and the Duchess had picked it up out of the rubble after her husband's death and put it in a drawer to use. Adrian had known some of it too. Adrian, last night by the candle, had told her about the letter. Adrian had been gentle. Adrian had said, "The words are in the letter, and I will not let my mother be the one to first speak them in your hearing." He had not, then, prevented it. He had not, in fact, ever told her what the words were, and Clara, sitting in the slant of the noon sun on the window seat of a great house she had agreed to marry into, did the cold thing the heart does when it is tired. She went past her own father, and she went past the Duchess, and she went, with a small, calm finality, straight to Adrian, and she set him down beside the rest of it, and she looked at him with the eyes of a woman who has been outside in the cold for too long. He had known, she thought, all along. He had known from the first morning. He had known when he had set the heron folio out on the library table. He had known when he had said, "Your father saved my father's life." He had known when he had asked her to walk by the river. He had known when he had warned her about Lady Frances. He had known when he had asked her to dance the country dance last night in front of 200 guests, in primrose silk, in her mother's pearls, because his pity had outrun his prudence, and he had not been able to bear another minute of her not yet knowing. He had married her, or was about to marry her, out of guilt for his father's old friend. He had pulled her off the carpet not because she had moved him, but because his father had loved her father, and a debt was a debt, and the Marchmonts of Wickham paid their debts. She had been kneeling in front of his mother for 1 minute, and she had thought herself rescued. She had not been rescued. She had been collected. The fire had been allowed to die in the grate during the morning, and the room had grown cold. Clara stood up. She was very calm. She found the small framed miniature of her mother and put it in the bottom of her trunk, with the pearls in their velvet roll beside it. She packed the grey gown and the 2 muslins, and the prayer book her father had given her at her confirmation, and she folded the primrose silk last, on top, because she could not bear, at this moment, to look at it. She closed the trunk. She sat down at the small writing desk by the window, and she wrote, in a hand much steadier than her own pulse. "Your Grace, I am leaving Wickham before dinner. A letter has come for me by this morning's post, which I think you would prefer I not name. The writer has not, I am told, written to you. He has no plans to write to you. I should be grateful, all the same, if the agreement we discussed last night might be considered withdrawn. I shall not be at the chapel on Sunday. I shall not, I think, ever be at the chapel here. I am sorry. I will not blame you, in any letter or in any drawing room, for any part of what has happened. You have been very kind to me. So has your mother at the end. I shall remember both kindnesses. I beg, in return, that you do not follow me to the inn at the village, and that you do not write to my aunt at the parsonage, and that, when in some quieter year you marry, as I hope you will, you marry the woman you would have married if I had never come. C. She did not, this time, fold the letter into an envelope. She left it open on the writing desk. She did not address it. He would know who it was for. She put on her travelling cloak. She picked up her small reticule. She rang once for Susan, and when Susan came, she said, in the same calm voice, "Susan, tell Mrs. Penn I am taking the small dog cart to the village. Tell her I shall return by dusk. Tell her I am perfectly well. Do not tell anyone else. Do not, in particular, tell His Grace." "Miss Susan, I shall send for the trunk in the morning. I am leaving. You have been very good to me. I am sorry, and I shall write to Mrs. Penn from the parsonage. Now go." Susan, who was 16 and freckled and very fond of her mistress, opened her mouth, closed it, dropped a curtsy that was almost a small embrace, and went. Clara walked down the back stairs for the last time. She crossed the cobbled yard. She climbed into the small dog cart that the undercoachman, who took Tuesday afternoons off and was therefore on duty on Sundays in compensation, had harnessed in 7 minutes flat without asking a question. She drove out under the porte-cochere. She did not look back at the long, grey facade. She did not see, at the upstairs window of the small library by the green room, the candle that had been left burning by accident, and had not, since 6, gone out. She went down the long avenue under the limes, and the wheels rattled, and the new mare picked up a trot, and the rain that had been threatening since noon began at last to fall on the leaves. The Duke came in at 4. He had been at the home farm. He had spent 2 hours in a wet ditch with the tenant called Gibbs and the new drainage engineer, and a length of clay pipe, and he had come back with his boots heavy and his mind full of estimates, and a small, private, warm thought about going up to the small parlour to have tea with Clara and Henry, in that order, before he washed. Mrs. Penn met him in the hall. She was very white. "Your Grace." "What?" "Miss Hartley has gone, sir, to the village, with Williams in the dog-cart. She has left a letter on the writing desk in her room. Susan is in tears in the linen cupboard. There is, sir, a letter on her night table from a man in Lincoln. I have not opened it. I think, sir, you had better." The Duke went up the stairs 3 at a time. He read the letter on the night table first, because Mrs. Penn had set it on top of the other one, and he read it standing by the cold grate, with his coat still on, and the rain still wet at the collar. He read it through once. He folded it. He set it back where it had been. He read Clara's letter then. He read it twice. He set it down on top of the first, very square, and he stood for a moment with both hands flat on the writing desk and his head bent. And then, in a voice that did not lift, he said one short word that the housekeeper, who had followed him up the stairs and was standing in the doorway, did not pretend not to have heard. "Mrs. Penn." "Sir." "Have Black Charlie saddled. Have the travelling chaise harnessed behind me. I will be at the village in 20 minutes. Send a rider ahead to the inn now, to ask the landlord on no account to let her hire a chaise without my coming up. Tell him I will pay any fee he names." "Yes, Your Grace." "And tell my mother where I have gone, and why. And tell her also," here he made his voice very level, "that I am going to marry that girl, whether her father stole the moon out of the sky or not, and that if she has any other letter she has been keeping for the right moment, She had better burn it today before I come back. Because if I find one, I shall not, this time, be civil. Yes, Your Grace. He went. The chaise rolled out under the porte cochere 10 minutes later, and the rain came harder, and the avenue of limes was black now under the cloud, and the saddle horse went ahead at a long, easy canter, and the Duchess of Wickham stood at the upstairs window with her hand at her own throat, and watched her son go to fetch back the girl she had once asked to kneel. The Black Boar at the village was a small, whitewashed inn with a landlord called Mr. Trubshaw, who had been the undergardener at Wickham House before he had married the previous landlord's daughter, and who therefore, when the runner came up at 4:30, did not need to be paid any fee at all. He showed Clara to the upstairs parlour and brought her a pot of tea and a covered plate of bread and ham, and he said that he was very sorry, ma'am, but that the post-chaise to Andover would not, on account of a lame leader, be available before morning. He bowed and went out. Clara sat in the upstairs parlour of the Black Boar, with her cloak still on, and her bonnet on the table, and the pot of tea cooling between her hands. And she did not, even now, weep. She had used up, on the window seat at noon, whatever it was she had to weep with. She drank a cup of the tea. She unbuttoned the cloak. She lifted the cover off the bread and ham. She had not eaten since 6. She had been wrong about her father. She had been wrong about her father all her life, and she had now to be a woman who had been wrong, and she was not, yet, very practiced at it. She had also been wrong, she thought after a moment, about Adrian. She had been wrong about Adrian in the slanted noon sun on the window seat. She had been wrong about him for 90 panicked minutes. She had decided, in those 90 minutes, that he had known and not told her. She had decided that he had married her out of guilt. She had decided that he had collected her, the way the Marchmonts collected debts. She had decided that the kingfisher and the perch and Henry on the riverbank and the candle in the small library had been a long and very gentle act of mercy by a man too well bred to refuse a duty. She had decided it because it was easier to be furious than to be the daughter of a thief. She set down the cup. She heard then a horse in the yard. She heard then boots on the wooden stair. The boots were running. The boots reached the landing. The door of the upstairs parlour opened without a knock, and the Duke of Wickham came in, hatless, soaked to the shoulder, the rain still running off his hair into the open collar of his shirt. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at her. He did not move. Clara? Adrian? He came in. He closed the door. He did not, at first, sit. He stood in the middle of the small room, with the rain dripping from his cuffs onto Mr. Trubshaw's clean floor, and he said, in a voice that was not quite his own, "I did not know." "You knew there was a letter." "I knew there was a letter that my father had loved. I knew there was a letter my mother kept in a drawer. I did not know what was in it. I have, before today, never read a single word of what is in it." He stopped. He turned, once, at the cold window, and turned back. The rain ran from his hair to his collar. "Your father and my father buried this between them in 1799, and neither of them ever spoke a word of it to a soul on the earth. My mother, who has hated almost everyone my father loved, found the letter in a drawer after his last illness, and kept it. The only thing she ever told me about it was that it would, one day, be useful. She did not tell me to whom. She did not tell me how. And you did not ask." "I did not ask." He breathed out. "I did not know, Clara, until I read the letter on your night table half an hour ago, that there had ever been a milliner's note in Cambridge. And I did not know, until I read your letter, what you had thought I knew." He came one step nearer. He did not, even now, reach for her hand. "I would have told you. I would have told you under a yew with Henry holding the trowel, if that had been the only way. I would not have let you walk down the avenue of limes in a primrose silk on Sunday morning, carrying it like a hidden blade in your sleeve. I'm not, Clara, that kind of man. She did not answer at once. She looked at him. He was, in the doorway light of the small upstairs parlor, the same lean, dark-eyed man she had seen on the chapel steps, and on the riverbank, and at the foot of the great staircase. The small, old scar at the corner of his lower lip moved a little as he spoke. "Sit down," she said. "You are dripping on Mr. Trapshaw's floor." He almost laughed. He did not, quite. He sat down on the edge of the wooden chair across from her. He did not, even now, reach for her hand. "I am sorry," he said. "I am sorry for what your father did, although it is not, properly, mine to be sorry for. I am sorry for what my mother did. I am most sorry that you have spent 4 hours sitting alone in a room thinking that I had known and not told you. That is the part of this afternoon I shall not, in this life, forgive myself for, because it was within my gift to prevent, and I did not. You could not have prevented a letter from Lincoln. I could have read the letter in my mother's drawer. I could have read it years ago. I knew it was there. I chose not to. I told myself it was none of my business. It was, in fact, exactly my business, the moment I picked you up off that carpet." He looked at her. "I am asking, Clara, for another minute, in this room, of the patience you gave me on the riverbank. After that, if you choose to take the post-chaise tomorrow, I will not stop you. I have already paid Mr. Trubshaw to have it ready. I will pay also for the seat to Andover. I will, even, pay for the second seat to Little Compton, if you mean to go on. I will not, however, follow." "You will not follow?" "I will not. A man who has had to be told twice that he is wanted is not a man worth marrying. I am not, Clara, twice told. I am asking only one more time. I am asking it because I do not believe that the woman who wrote the letter on the writing desk upstairs is the woman who would walk away from a country dance she had decided, last night, by candlelight, to dance for the rest of her life." She looked at him for a long second. The rain was still on his hair. The fire in the small grate, which Mr. Trumpshaw had built up against the wet, popped once, and a small piece of coal fell. He did not move. She lifted her face to him at last. The grey light from the small parlour window fell across her cheekbone in a clean line. "My father was a thief, Adrian. Your father was, once, at 19, a thief. Your father then spent 43 years not being a thief. I shall, if you will allow it, take the 43. I shall very probably be a worse wife to you for knowing it. You shall, very probably, be exactly the same wife to me you would otherwise have been, except that you will, occasionally, on Sunday mornings, when I am too sure of myself in a pulpit which is not, fortunately, my own, lean across and remind me by name of a milliner in Cambridge. I shall be the better duke for it." She looked at him. The smile, which had been a thing she had not been able to make for 4 hours, came back, slowly, at the corner of her own mouth. He saw it. He did not, even now, reach for her hand. She set down the cup. The brandy and the tea, in the cooling air of the inn parlour, smelled of warm wood and oranges. "Adrian." "Yes?" "Come home with me." "I am at home with you," he said, "from this minute. The house is incidental. But yes. Let us go and tell Mrs. Penn. She's been keeping a hot brick on the hob for you since 2. He stood. He held out his hand. She took it. They went down the wooden stairs together, and Mr. Trubshaw in the hall bowed very low and said nothing at all, and Williams was already at the chaise step with his hat in his hand. They drove back up the long avenue of limes in the last of the light. They did not speak much. He held her hand under the rug. At the porte cochere, the doors were open. Mrs. Penn was in the front hall with a lit branch of candles. Henry, in his small nightshirt, with the dog Mustard in his arms and Susan behind him, was sitting on the bottom step of the great staircase, having refused, with the calm certainty of a child, to be put to bed before he had seen them come in. And at the foot of the staircase, in cloth of silver again, no, not silver this time, in plain dove grey, with no jewels at all, stood the Duchess of Wickham. She did not move when they came in. She let Henry run first to Clara, and she let the dog be passed from arm to arm, and she let the Duke take off his soaked coat and hand it to a footman without looking, and only when the small flurry had quieted did she walk out 3 paces into the centre of the great marble floor. The floor was the same black and white marble Clara had crossed in her plain travelling boots 10 days before. The clock, the size of a doorway, struck once, 7:30. The Duchess looked at Clara. The whole hall, Mrs. Penn, Henry, Susan, the 2 footmen, the under-butler at the door, fell, without a word from anyone, very quiet. "Miss Hartley," the Duchess said. Her voice was perfectly steady and perfectly clear, and did not rise, and did not need to. "I asked you, in the drawing-room, 10 days ago, to curtsy lower than a girl of your station bends to a girl of mine. I was wrong. I was wrong in front of these ladies, and these footmen, and this house. I am, in front of the same footmen and the same house, and the same marble floor, asking you now to forgive me. And I am asking it in the only way I know how." And the Duchess of Wickham, in her plain dove-grey morning gown, in front of her housekeeper and her grandson and her son and 2 footmen and an under-butler, with the rain still on the marble at the doorway from Clara's cloak, lowered herself, very slowly, into the deepest curtsy that any woman in that house had been seen to make in 40 years. She held it. Her head went down. Her grey hair almost brushed the floor. The Duke moved. Clara stopped him, with one hand at his sleeve. "Now," she said quietly, "let her finish." The Duchess finished. She rose, with the steadiness of a woman who had been taught to rise from a curtsy at 6 and had not forgotten. She lifted her chin. She did not lower her eyes. "Welcome home, Miss Hartley," she said. Clara crossed the marble to her. She did not, this time, curtsy. She put her hands on the older woman's shoulders, very gently, and she kissed her, once, on each cheek, the way Lady Frances had been kissed in this same hall a week ago. The Duchess closed her eyes. When she opened them they were wet, and she did not pretend they were not. "Welcome home, Mother," Clara said. Mrs. Penn, at the side, dropped one small, fast curtsy of her own to nobody in particular, and turned her face away. They were married on the 3rd Sunday in October, in the small chapel at Wickham. The banns had been read 3 times. The Duchess sat in the front pew, in plain dove grey, with Lady Frances Vane on her right, and the dog Mustard, by Henry's special request, in a basket at her feet. The Duke wore the dark blue Wickham coat with the single ring of his father on his smallest finger. Clara walked up the aisle in a gown of palest cream silk and her mother's small grey pearls, and she was given away by an elderly canon from Wiltshire who had, at the rehearsal, finally completed the history of the baronies. Henry was at the altar, with the rings on a cushion, which he did not, even at the most important moment, allow himself to drop. In the drawing-room afterwards, before the assembled cousins and Lady Cherwell and the Carstairs girls and the new vicar from Little Compton, the Duchess of Wickham stood up at her own table, in front of her own people, and said, "I asked the bride, 10 days before this marriage, to curtsy lower than a girl of her station bends to a girl of mine. She knelt. I am ashamed of it. She has, since, forgiven me. I shall, with the rest of this family, spend the remainder of my days deserving the forgiveness. To my new daughter." The room rose. The glasses lifted. Clara, between her husband and a small boy holding a now empty cushion, lifted her own, and met the older woman's eyes across the long table, and inclined her head, very slightly, in the smallest curtsy of the throat that a duchess gives another duchess at her own table. Late that night, when the cousins had gone, and the candles had been put out in the great rooms, and Henry had been carried to bed, asleep with the dog under his arm. The Duke and the new Duchess of Wickham walked, alone, through the empty marble hall, to the door at the foot of the small back stairs. He stopped her at the door. He took her hands, both of them, in both of his. He looked at her in the small light of the single candle Mrs. Penn had left in a sconce. The hall behind them was dark, the great clock ticking on. The single candle in the wall sconce threw their shadows tall on the marble. "You are very tired," he said. "I am very married," she said. He smiled. The small scar at the corner of his mouth caught the candlelight. "Yes, there is that." "Adrian." "Yes." "Thank you for pulling me to my feet." He smiled. It was the slow, real smile from the riverbank. The small old scar at the corner of his lower lip moved with it. "My darling," he said, "we do not kneel in this room." He kissed her hand. She kissed his. They went up the back stairs together to the warm light of their own door, and the candle in the sconce burned low behind them. And somewhere in the house a clock struck once, and the great marble hall, where a parson's daughter had once been asked to curtsy lower than her own self-respect, lay quiet and empty, and very plainly, at last, hers.